Hello students, welcome back to the Analyst for 16th June 2024, where we will be discussing 9 most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Today's very first article is on the status quo of the Indian economy and what to be done in the next 5 years. In the next one, we'll be looking at the recent collaboration between the G7 nations and the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. In the next article, we'll be looking into detailed aspects of self-help groups. In the next article, we'll be looking into the left-wing extremism trends in the country. And in the fifth article, we'll be looking into a premiere on the new criminal laws. And finally, we'll be wrapping up the discussion with Prelims Snippets, where we'll be covering 4 important articles from Prelims point of view. And finally, we know that all of you who have appeared in the prelims this year, I hope all of your exams went well. And with this, let's get started. Now, before I begin the very first article, the viewers of the Analyst have been consistent over a period of 1 year. And I hope many of you have appeared in this year's prelims examination. And I hope the Analyst program has been very useful for all of you, right? And here, I want to ask all of you individually, personally, that how was your prelims examination? You please let me know in the comment section below, and I hope that all my future bureaucrats will definitely be cracking the examination in this very attempt. Now with this, we'll be starting the very first article. In this one, we'll be looking into what are the next steps that the Indian economy should be taking. And this is because we need to have a relook at the Indian economy, because we have a new coalition government in place at the center. And this is a very important piece of article when we look at prelims, because we have economic and social development, and also we have the portions related to GS3 Indian economy and the issues of resources and the mobilization of the same. Now, according to the article, we have the National Statistical Office's data with reference to the GDP growth rate when we consider the 2023-24 financial year, that is the last financial year. In the same period of time, India as an economy grew at a pace of 8.2% per annum. And let me tell you, India right now is the fastest growing country when we talk about the growth of GDP around the world. We even have surpassed China and also the other major developing nations when we talk of our GDP growth. And this is because India has been very resilient when it comes to the production of goods and services, the exports, and also the industrial level of production over a period of time. And that is where we have to understand China as a global economy power, right? It is on a decline due to the various reasons that have started from the COVID pandemic, and also that have continued into the global issues that China is having with the rest of the world. And in the middle, India has actually led the race. And here, when we talk about our own Reserve Bank of India's projection with reference to the financial year that is coming in this particular year, that is 2024-25 financial year, RBI is expecting that Indian economy will be in the next year growing at 7.2%. This is actually more than the 7% that RBI has actually predicted before for this financial year. And RBI attributes that in India, the retail inflation will be also slowing down to 4.5% from around 5.2% right now. So Indian inflation at the retail markets, RBI is telling that approximately it's around 5.2 to 5.5% as of now. It will be decreasing over a period of time to 4.5%, and it is a very, very important factor when we consider the low effect of inflation, or say the lower rate of inflation on the economic growth. It is very, very important to know that the lesser the inflation would be, the better the economic performance would be in the near future, right? So here it is a very, very important point to note. Finally, when we talk about the United Nations also revised the Indian economic growth to 7%, and this is also very, very important because not only our own domestic, say, organizations, government, right, authorities are focusing on India's growth rate in a positive stance. The UN and the other economic organizations such as World Bank, IMF, right, WEF, they have also predicted that India will be having a higher amount of growth rate than the other nations. So we can understand we are in a better position when we talk about the economic size. And when we talk about India in 2030, we have to understand that by 2030, India will be within the top 3 countries all around the world when we talk about the nominal GDP, and it is expected that India will be adding as much as the European Union to the global GDP by 2030. And this is a very, very important report by Mahindra Group. So you can even quote this in your answers, right? Now India is on a path to attain the status of developed country by 2047 or Viksit Bharat, right, by 2047. So this is where India's own policy ambitions, economic ambitions must be steered to generate India, to actually grow India to $30 trillion economy by 2030. And also this envisages that according to US dollar terms, Indians will be earning $17,000 per annum. This is actually far ahead from what India's per capita income right now. And to become a Viksit Bharat by 2047, India's targets must be in the same manner. By 2030, it is also predicted that India's manufacturing sector will be increasing 16 times, making India for the world, that is making India a global export hub by manufacturing goods and services in the country. It will be increasing 11 times. And also when we talk about inclusive growth, or that kind of growth where all the sections of the population actually grows with the same rate as GDP, right? So we understand that inclusive growth is actually that parameter which leads the development of all the sectors of the country, or all the sections in the population too. And this will be also increasing by 45%. So these are the green signals for the country. Now there are also some red flags. Firstly, we have to understand when we talk about the consumption in the country, the private final consumption, or say the consumption which is actually done by the citizens of the country, is actually on the decline. And this is also attributed to the lagging effects of high rates of unemployment and also high rates of inflation in the past 1 and 2, 3 years. So this is also, we have to understand the consumption is actually on a declining trajectory, but also it is expected that in the next few years, it will be again picking up due to positive economic recovery. Now, we have to also understand about the industrial output, that in the last 3 months, right, industrial output was 5%, at a low at around 5%. So that means the industrial sector is definitely growing, but it grew at a very low pace, which was the lowest in the last 3 months. And when we talk about the industrial output and also about the consumption trends, we have to take into the climatic factors also, such as the heat waves in the country which are prevailing right now. The heat waves of the in India is actually impacting India's growth. And this is what we have to also understand, the trends from the GST. Now GST, or the goods and services taxes revenues, are actually increasing over a period of time. But we have found that in the last month, right, the GST collections couldn't even cross 10% growth. That means even in this matter, like the same as in industrial growth, right, it is actually growing. And also GST collections are even growing. But we have to understand that the growth rate is not reaching 10%. So we have to understand that GST kind of sales is directly related to higher amount of consumption, say higher amount of production. If GST revenues are not decreasing, that means obviously the people of the country are not spending much, producing much. So that is one of the reasons that India is also concerned about. Also, when we talk about the agricultural outlook, as of now, the IMD has predicted a normal monsoon for this particular financial year, but it is still to be seen as to what the final extent of monsoons would be. There are also predictions of, say, a wide range of floods, and also the effect of heat waves are still there. We can also have the impacts on the issues which are taking place abroad, such as the conflicts taking place abroad and the fallout of them on the Indian agricultural sector. So the agricultural output is actually mixed. That means in India, we have a kind of a mixed kind of optimism for the growth of agricultural sector. And this has to be yet kept under observation by the Indian government. Now, we have to understand that here, we have to talk about the recent change in this electoral kind of a scene, where we have seen the emergence of a coalition government, where we have the recent third phase of the NDA government, where we have a kind of a coalition agreement with the various political parties within the NDA. And we have seen that there was a decline in the electorate, or say the amount of share of the BJP in the third NDA government, and this is actually giving rise to various apprehensions about the economic stability of the country. Now when we talk about this coalition government, now economic experts and all of the experts are still positive that the policy continuity will be maintained, or say whatever the government of India was actually spending on, or say having the economic policies on, be it the policies on infrastructure, be it the policy on export-oriented growth, be it the policy of Atmanirbhar Bharat, where we are trying to promote more and more domestic manufacturing via many schemes such as PLI schemes and so on. So this policy continuity definitely will be. When we even talk about the agricultural sector, right, the rising trend of MSPs, recently as we have seen, MSPs have been hiked. So this is actually continuing the trend of the policy that the government has been continuing as a period of time, right? On the other hand, the government also have many kind of agendas when it comes to economic reforms. Firstly, the government has this mega agenda since the last 10 years that the Indian government as a whole must be spending more on capital expenditure. So we have seen a vast amount of capital expenditure schemes such as National Infrastructural Pipeline, National Monetization programs. We have the various amounts of strategic disinvestments which are taking place, right? We are seeing this kind of economic expenditures on the various capital side, right? We also, when we talk about the fiscal consolidation, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, when the government expenditures, or say the fiscal deficit, right, was actually very high at around 7-8% of the GDP. Right now, Indian government is trying to reduce the fiscal deficit to 4.5% of the GDP, and in this target, the government is trying to reduce the expenditures over a period of time. As we can see from the interim budget of 2024 to 2025, we find that Indian government is spending more on the various expenditures, right? For example, economic services, fertilizer subsidies, food subsidies, and so on the central sector scheme as a whole. Indian government is spending on the various scheme expenditures, on centrally sponsored scheme, and also various other transfers when we talk about, right? Now we understand the expenditure is always more for a developing nation like India, and that is what Indian government is also trying to reduce the fiscal deficit over a period of time to actually reduce the amount of liability on the government. Then finally, we have several reforms on the hand, such as on the land reforms and the labor reforms, where we have to understand this is the where we have had many actually labor codes, right? The 4 labor codes. We had many amounts of initiatives on the land acquisition, on the land mapping, on land surveys, and so on. So these are the various aspects where Indian government is focusing on to attract more and more private investment, to attract more and more FDI in the country, and also to promote domestic manufacturing, particularly by the MSMEs and the startups. Now here, there are actually key challenges. Firstly, the challenges of coalition politics. We know that in coalition politics, or say a government, the coalition partners have their own individual demands, which can be sometimes compromising the economic priorities, right, and giving the importance of political priorities more. Then when we talk about inflation, right now even when we talk about the inflation, especially in the food inflation side, is around 7 to 8%. And when we talk about inflation as a whole, this has actually come below RBI's 2% to 6% inflation target, or 4 plus minus 2 target. But definitely we have to understand food component, or the inflation in food items, is particularly high due to the fluctuations of volatility in the agricultural markets. Then also when we talk about the savings and the investment side, now India is also promoting a lot of capital sector schemes, and also when we talk about the capex expenditure, India has to source them from the savings and the investment, right? And that is what we have to also look at, that Indian government must be promoting more and more financial inclusion in the country, more and more reforms in the public sector banks, more and more aspects of lending by the various banking sectors, and also about the financial sector issues, or say reforms when it comes to the general insurance companies and also the LIC. So these are the various challenges that India has to meet when it comes to the investment side, and also when it comes to saving side. Indians as a whole right now has been seen are increasingly investing in the stock markets, in the mutual fund markets, right? So this is also a good signal, but on the other hand, they have to also be careful careful, the authorities also have to be careful because of the volatility in the stock markets. As we have also seen on the 4th of June, the stock markets were very, very volatile, and this is also one of the areas where the government has to work upon. Finally, when we talk about the taxation and the regulatory reforms, particularly when we talk about the reforms that are needed in the GST, right? So these actually need a kind of a consensus between majority of the states and also of the central government. And any changes within the GST, such as the various issues that we have within the GST system, such as the inverted duty structure, such as the various issues of evasion within the GST system or fake invoices. So there are many issues with the GST taxation system. Also, when we talk about the direct taxes, right, there are also many issues there too. Next, when it comes to the various regulatory reforms, particularly when we refer to the various amounts of regulator in the country, be it the Competition Commission of India, be it the IRDI, be it the various regulators, their appointments, their kind of strength of institution is very important for economic reforms, because we understand the strength of institutions in the country that determines the strength of economic resilience of a particular country. So this is where we have to understand the upcoming budget, right, in the coming days, right, have to be focusing on some key areas. Firstly, the government of India must be improving the ease of living for the people. As we have seen, inflation, right, inflation over a period of time have been typically over this 6% target of this RBI, right? So when we look at the overall inflation, it has been kind of hovering at around 6%. But when we look at fuel and light inflation, when we look at food inflation, these have always been volatile inflation. Or when we talk about the core inflation, which is excluding the volatile item, have been kind of unstable. But when we exclude the volatile items, right, such as fuel and light and food items, we find that the amount of inflation that is happening here is actually very high, and this is actually degrading the value of ease of living of the people. So Indian government and also the RBI must be working on the same. Next, when we talk about the integration of the Indian economy into the global value chains, we have to understand that India right now is on a mission mode to increasingly be dominant and be present in the global value chains of manufacturing of major goods and services, especially the electronic items. So particularly because Chinese domestic manufacturing sector is not growing at a particular pace of rate, and that is why the major Western European nations and also the American nations are shifting their base, and that is where India is also trying to capitalize on. When we talk about the liberal trade policies that are required in the next budget, we obviously talk about the liberal amount of import duties and also the export duties to promote more and more trade in the country. When we talk about the various impacts of the geopolitical risks, we talk about or say the impact of Russia-Ukraine crisis, the various issues which are taking place in the African continent, or also the various issues that are also a result of Chinese ambitions, also the Israel-Hamas issue. So we understand we live in a world where we are surrounded with global economic and military and various other issues. So that is where this we have to also include in our budget, and also this has to be considered while we are talking about the budget aspects. When we talk about the various sectoral priorities, the various initiatives for agricultural sector, industrial sector, services sectors, they must be brought in convergence with the various needs and also requirements of the day. And finally, when we talk about the financial sector reforms, we talk about the need for reconstruction of the various banks in the countries, the public sector banks in the countries. Now, it has been recommended that in the financial year of 2025, there will be a major merger of the public sector banks, and also if possible, there can be even a privatization of the banking system because of the increasing amount of, or say high amount of NPAs in the public sector banks apart from the private sector banks, right? So there can be also an indication towards this particular form. Next, when we talk about the regional development, we have to talk about the equal growth and development across all the parts of the country. And especially when we talk about this coalition government, we have to focus that there are many regions which are not part of the coalition. So that effect must not be taking place on the economic development. And finally, Indian long-term vision is to become a $30 trillion economy by this next 20-30 years. And also when we talk about this long-term vision, India has to understand that it has to focus on the long-term aspects of capital expenditures and the various improvement of the welfare of the people. So this is where India must be focusing increasingly on over a period of time to actually realize that vision of becoming a developed country by 2047, or say a Viksit Bharat. In the next article, we'll be looking into the G7 commitment to the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. And this is a very, very important portion of our prelims, where we have to look at the current events of national and international importance, and also into GS2 about the bilateral, regional and the global groupings that are affecting India's interest. When we talk about the IMEC is consisted of India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, Greece, the entire of European Union, France, Italy, Germany and also the US. In fact, US will be one of the major funders of this entire economic corridor. And when we talk about this corridor, this will be having Eastern Corridor and the Northern Corridor. In the Eastern Corridor, we will be having connections, or say with our own Indian mainland from Gujarat and Maharashtra, with the Chabahar port and also the various aspects of the Iran region, and also in the Middle East Gulf region, starting from Saudi Arabia, UAE, right? So from this we find that this will be a sea route. From UAE to around say Israel, we'll be having a kind of a rail route, a mix of road routes also. And finally from here we'll be again having a ship route along the entire Mediterranean Sea, reaching the shores of the European continent. So this will be the Eastern and the Northern corridor within this IMEC. Here the main focus is on increasing trade, energy security of the entire region. Particularly we find that China is increasingly focusing on its Belt and Road Initiative, and Chinese authorities are also spending a lot of money on encircling India and also Europe with many like-minded nations with China, such as Pakistan, some nations of Central Asia and so on. So China is trying to build their own alliance along the entire region here, and also along the entire coast of, and so entire continent of Africa too. So this is where India and also the Europe and also the Western nations, particularly the US, is focusing on building this resilient network consisting of railways, ship rail transit network and also road transport routes, as we have seen in this map. The other components of this corridor will be electricity cable that will be providing electricity connections to the countries which are falling between this region, and also to the countries which are very in close proximity, such as Central Asia and also the African continent. And when we talk about the hydrogen pipeline, this program or say corridor is also envisaging this hydrogen pipeline to be constructed from India to Europe. And this is a very, very important aspect of energy security in the future, because in the future, right, it is expected that the future is going towards green energy, and hydrogen energy is one of the forms of green energy. And finally, high-speed data cable and internet connectivity will be also developed along this portal and also this corridor. Now here we have to look into the status of IMEC. Now as of now we find that the rail projects such as Etihad Rail and the Gulf Railways, they are actually still in construction when we talk about the railway transit between UAE and Saudi Arabia. And when we talk from Saudi Arabia, right, to Israel, we find that the Israel-Gaza conflict is going on as of now. And this is where we have to understand there has been a strain of relationships kind of between the Islamic world and also between Israel. And that is where it has been apprehended, it has been understood that this effect of Israel conflict can take place on this entire economic corridor. But we have to understand the main aspect of this is actually linking Al-Hadida to Haifa in Israel. This is actually this connectivity, this road connectivity. And we have to understand that while we are facing some delays in the construction and the overlaying of this road, but it is optimistic to believe that this crisis should be isolated from the entire IMEC, right? Because also, as we see right now, the European continent and the European leaders, they themselves feel that any crisis that is taking place between Israel and Hamas, this will be not having an impact between the IMEC and the commitment that the various countries are actually placed on this, right? This is according to our own Foreign Secretary of India. And we have to understand that geopolitics here is the biggest hurdle here. Firstly, we have seen that the Gaza war is causing these apprehensions and kind of split between the various countries which are a part of this corridor. Then we also understand there are many amount of infrastructural issues, particularly when we talk about the low development of infrastructure, particularly in the Asian continent, up to this Asian part of the IMEC. When we talk about the European part, it is well developed, but we generally have lesser amount of infrastructure development in the Asian region. Also, when we talk about the role of Turkey, Turkey was also thought of or say envisaged to be included in the corridor because Turkey is close to China. It is actually understood that maybe Turkey will also be causing some issues because it was also envisaged that a substantial portion of this IMEC would also cross through Turkey. Because of Chinese dominance over Turkey, this was not possible, and there are some issues that Turkey may be causing some security implications on this corridor. And finally, the rise of Donald Trump in the US politics, it is also envisaged that if Donald Trump is coming to power, he may not be going forward with the project or say that with the huge funding that the US is actually putting into IMEC. For India, there are some issues, particularly with reference to the hydrogen pipeline here, because India is still a fossil fuel based economy because of its developmental aspirations. And here we have to understand the hydrogen that is generated in the country is also derived from say fossil fuels, which may not be acceptable to the European Union and the other Western nations. So India has to, in addition to IMEC, have to put in more costs to actually generate hydrogen from greener sources such as renewable energies, right? So green hydrogen is actually a very costly affair which the India must be doing as a part to become a part of this pipeline. Now there are also political issues when we talk about the entire crisis that is happening all around the world. India is also having various stances with reference to the various crises and also with reference to Israel when it comes to the recognition of the various issues taking place in Israel and also about the nature of the conflict. So this is where some political issues are there when with reference to this IMEC. And now when we look at the other regional aspirations or the other kind of regional corridors, we find this is the Lobito corridor, which is connecting the Western Africa to the Eastern Africa. This is a very, very important corridor which is trying to reduce the distance taken by sea route. If it is crossing downward the African continent, it can actually cut the time taken by ships by actually focusing on Lobito corridor. It is also envisaged that near Philippines, Japan, Luzon economic corridor will be also developed, where the focus is generally on the infrastructure development, information technology development, and also the energy, semiconductor, agribusiness and nickel projects in the nation. So here we have understood that apart from IMEC, there are some regional corridors also present where these have to also be included with IMEC. Now please do include these points in your main answers to get that extra 1 marks. And here we also understand that Africa is constructing a Great Green Wall. That means Africa is trying to convert the entire deserted regions and also the regions which are very prone to land degradation to greenery by planting more and more native trees. And the goal is actually afforestation of 100 million hectares of land, and as of now we have completed 15 million hectares of constructing this Great Green Wall. And we have to understand that this is a project which is actually seeing success over a period of time. So this is what we have to understand, that these regional aspirations, if they can be linked to IMEC, it can reap more and more heavy amount of dividends for the entire coalition. Now the main aspect of this current affairs is actually the G7 support for IMEC. We understand that G7 has promised that apart from this IMEC, that there should be an AI governance for the entire world, particularly for the global South nations, because of the various threats and the opportunities of the AI. Apart from this, it has also promised the amount of developmental loans to the Ukraine for the conflict which is taking place there. And also when we talk only about IMEC and the G7, we know that G7 as a whole is actually trying to counter China because of its increasing amount of aggressiveness and economic developmental tentacles that China is spreading all around the world. And this is what we have to understand. G7 is seeing and looking at IMEC as an alternative opportunity to actually capitalize on and counter China. Then it is also trying to promote concrete infrastructural projects via the partnership for global infrastructure and investment map, right? Here we have to understand this is the map which is showing the countries where India is also part of, right? We find that in Asia we have Japan, we have India, we have Saudi Arabia, right, which are actually part of this, right, PGII, which is a global partnership for developing infrastructure. So the G7 also committed the infrastructural part to the IMEC in this particular matter. India and the G7 is also trying to promote the free and open Indo-Pacific Ocean, where the trade aspects and the countering China aspect is very important right now. Then also when we talk about the Gulf region and using the Gulf region via the Suez Canal to for linking Europe to Asia and the other parts of the world, we find that the Gulf region right now is actually embroiled in various conflicts, be it the conflict that the West has with Iran, or be it the Israel-Hamas issue, or be it the various local crises such as Yemen crisis which is taking place, or say be it the crisis related to pirates, right? So the construction of the IMEC will be eradicating all of this problem, because it will be taking place over the UAE, Saudi Arabia directly to Israel, and then henceforward. So it is also focusing on the particular matter. Then also as a part of strengthening economic resilience and also trade diversification from both India and the EU and also the US side, it is expected that this corridor will be leading and also helping in the same. And finally, India wants to project itself as the global leader when it comes to the aspirations of the global South nations. And here India tends or wants to be a Vishwa Guru, where on the other side EU has been planning a global strategy to rival China via IMEC and the various other aspects, because it is countering China with reference to the Belt and Road Initiative. And we can also look at this map here, the amount of debt trap that China has actually spread across the world, right? So India, on one hand, it wants to become a Vishwa Guru of the various, say, global South nations, like-minded nations. On the other hand, the European partners, particularly the EU, wants to actually talk about strengthen the economic resilience and the trade diversification aspect. So this is where the entire picture of G7 and IMEC becomes very clear that both are actually focusing on the same aspirations, and here the main agenda and the main economic reforms and the main aspect of infrastructural development should be focusing on right now immediately on actually resolving the issues in the Gulf region, particularly between Israel and Hamas conflict, to actually speed up the delays in the infrastructural development. In the next article, we will be looking into self-help groups, because recently the self-help model in Rajasthan's Dholpur district has helped around 12,500 women in the West African nations of Mali and Senegal. This is a very, very important part of your prelim syllabus, where we have economic and social development, GS2 where we have the developmental process and in the development industry when we talk about the self-help groups, the role of self-help groups, and finally in GS3 where we have to talk about inclusive growth and the issues rising from the same. Now here, when we talk about self-help groups, if we talk about the definition of the same, self-help groups are actually the collective group of around 10 to 15 individuals. Mostly we have seen this is the group of women coming together for economic activities and also for activities such as credit or credit inclusion by the financial sector, such as banks and so on. So here a group of individuals, mostly women, they come together and they start an economic activity, mostly by using their own savings or by taking loans from banks. According to Economic Survey to 2022-23, 1.2 crore self-help groups are present in the nation, and here 88% of the self-help groups are actually constituted wholly of women. And here the main primary objectives of self-help groups is firstly to promote financial discipline among the group members. If we talk about the group members, we find that they are actually involved in various economic activities of, say, producing papads, pickles, sanitizers, sanitary napkins, and so on. So this is actually promoting financial discipline of encouraging entrepreneurship and also actually managing funds for production of goods and services. This is also very easy for a bank to identify self-help groups and give loans or credit to the self-help groups as a whole. So the main aspect here is also to raise credit for actually including amount of financial inclusion between the people. This is actually possible through more amount of microfinance, or loans which are given in small quantums to the self-help groups. Next, we have to also understand self-help groups' primary objectives is also increasing the amount of women empowerment when we talk about the social and economic development, right? Because it gives them economic opportunity and also a self-esteem in the society to actually work and operate with decent living wages. Next, it is also very important for the self-help groups to skill and empower their workers, their women workers. So this self-help groups is also partnering with various NGOs, government of India or government of various states to actually start to focus on investing in various skilling and capacity building programs. And finally, it is also to develop the entire community of the rural areas and also some communities of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities to help improve their collective bargaining and decision making power. When we talk about the evolution of self-help groups over a period of time, the main idea of self-help groups started in Bangladesh from Professor Yunus Grameen Bank model. Now this is a very important point for your mains answers. Please do quote them in your mains answers to get that extra point, that the main aspect of self-help groups originated from Bangladesh from Grameen Bank model. And here Professor Yunus was very instrumental in this. And in India we started the same in 1989, where the self-help group bank linkage program with partnership from the NABARD was actually started, where the SSGs were linked to the various local banks and regional banks, and the credit was actually given to the SSGs as a whole. And here the NABARD was actually facilitating the main aspect of the lending and all the core aspects of giving loans to the SSGs. And here in 1999, the National Rural Livelihood Mission was also launched and also included the SSGs empowerment, where we have to find that around 67.9 million women are actually included under this mission, right? And also 56% of the households belong to the SC/ST community. So it means that we have more inclusion of various communities, right? When we talk about the women, right, around 7 million women have gained financial literacy of having bank accounts, operating the various balance sheets of their companies and handling expenses. So this is what we have to understand, that this has been a mission which has been highly instrumental. When we talk about the advantages, we have to understand this will be obviously leading to financial inclusion, because it will be including those groups of the population which has been excluded in the economic sector for a period of time, that is the women. And if we can represent women in the workforce, we can reap wonders from them. And obviously their own financial inclusion, their own amount of having bank accounts, savings, they will be leading to their own personal life and development and opportunities, and also their families and so on. When we talk about women empowerment, we understand that having economic opportunities in itself is a kind of a boon for the various people of the nation. And here they are actually starting to do business on their own. The business range from various products. It can be handicrafts, it can be food products, it can be various other products. So this is actually leading to more and more women empowerment in the region. And also when we talk about the women empowerment aspect, we have to also talk about the amount of aspirations over a period of time that are actually fulfilled via SSGs. Next, we have to also talk about the inclusion of the corporate social responsibility support in this self-help groups, because there have been many companies who have to dedicate a section of their profits to the social welfare programs. And many companies, private companies, they start to actually dedicate funds to various self-help groups. And also when we talk about the collateral of the loans, here the main advantage for the self-help groups is that whenever they are taking any loans, they do not have to deposit any collateral. So that is also one of the main benefits here. Next, when we talk about poverty alleviation, we have to understand, according to the labor force participation rate, according to the recent PLFS survey, the labor force participation of women have actually increased to 10.3% in the last financial year. And this is one of the main reasons we have to understand this increase can be attributed to self-help groups in the country. And finally, there are some challenges. For example, the very first challenge is actually the access to credit, because there have been many instances where the self-help groups were not able to access credit from the banks due to various norms and regulations, right? There also have been many kind of SSGs who are having gross NPAs or non-performing assets, or the SSGs who have taken loans but cannot pay back to the banks. So this is also one of the challenges that the government must be looking into. Then there is also lack of awareness of the various schemes and policies of the government for the self-help groups in the country. Now these are some of the challenges, and this is why we have the various kind of best practices for you all to actually include them in your mains answers. Firstly, we find that the Seva, right, is a kind of a cooperative society of women which is trying to increase the women participation in various goods and services. So this is a very famous example of an SSG which is trying to do upliftmental work. Then we have Dholpur's SSG from the news that we have seen, where they believe in 5 principles of Rajivika. This is actually about weekly meeting, weekly savings, internal borrowing, loan repayment, maintenance of records, right, where these all aspects of management of self-help groups have led to higher profits of the self-help groups in the Dholpur region. And this is where they have now gone to various African nations such as Mali and Senegal, and the women members of the self-help groups, they have gone there and actually trained the self-help groups in Africa. So we can understand this is an excellent opportunity where the Indian women, especially Rajasthani women, they got the opportunity to actually teach what they have learnt. Now just imagine that amount of self-esteem that a woman is actually gaining, firstly from gaining financial independence, right? Then actually gaining the amount of expertise of giving training to other countries. So this is actually where we have to understand that economic benefits from SSGs go beyond just economic and social terms, right? It also goes into various amounts of social prestige in the society. Next, there is an NGO model where we have to understand that NGOs also have the partnerships with SDGs, and NGOs help and support them in actually getting loans from the banks, because there are actually SSGs which maybe do not have that amount of financial literacy to actually go to banks and take some loans. So here the partners will be NGOs, and here we have 2 very important NGOs which are actually Eco Roots Foundation NGOs, which are actually helping many self-help groups in the Uttar Pradesh to actually focus on producing handicrafts. So we can actually quote these are our main answers. Then also we have the Sahel Foundation in the northeast region, right? Particularly we can talk about Denlang SSG, which is trying to promote more and more local handicraft, local produce from the northeast region of the nation also, right? When we talk about banks, prominent commercial banks, we also have Bandhan Bank, right, in tie with the Konnagar region of West Bengal, and the SSGs located in that region. So we also have some excellent examples of banks which are proactively trying to give loans and having partnerships with the SSGs. Next, we also have Kashmir's Pulwama district's SSGs, which are promoting organic farming. Then finally, we have Udhampur's agripreneurs or agricultural entrepreneurs, which are trying to lead innovations in the agricultural sector, and this is actually led by women in the region. So we have to understand these are the best practices which you can replicate in your mains answers to get that extra point here. Finally, we have to look at some of the government initiatives of the self-help groups. Now there was a S.K. Kalia committee which actually focused on the recommendation of the bank linkage program for the self-help groups. Remember the initiative that we have discussed? It was actually recommended by S.K. Kalia committee, and it is a very important committee for all of you. Next, when we talk about the state government's initiatives, now this Kadambashri from Kerala is a very important aspect and a very important scheme of the Kerala government to promote SSGs in the state. Next, when we have amount of lending to the various sectors in the country which are very important, such as agriculture sector, such as MSME sectors, now SSGs are also included in a sector which is known as priority sector lending. That means the commercial banks in the country will be giving 40% of their entire loans to the priority sector lending sections, right, where we have SSG as one of the sector. When it comes to the RRB and the small finance banks, this percentage goes up to 75%. We have another important scheme, the Priyadarshini scheme, which is actually main aim to empower the girl child of the workers of the SSGs. It is actually looking into the development of educational and nutritional requirements of the children of the parents who are working in the SSGs. Next, we have also the Din Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, where we have had this amount of initiatives to promote digital literacy, to promote financial literacy between the members of the SSGs, and it has been understood that SSGs were centered as a core aspect of development for the entire rural areas. Next, we have the Mahila Kishan Sashaktikarana Pariyojana, which is trying to help the women SSGs, women-led SSGs in the agriculture sector by giving them more credit for purchasing various agriculture commodities. And finally, we have the Rashtriya Mahila Kosh, which is actually leading to more and more financial initiatives for the women SSGs, and also the Jan Dhan Yojana, which is trying to promote the linkage of the bank accounts and say opening of bank accounts for every individual citizen in the nation, where the women SSG members are also encouraged to open individual bank accounts, leading to more financial inclusion. Finally, we have the Drone Didi initiative, which is actually trying to promote the use of drones between the women SSGs so that they can rent out the drones for having extra income. And for purchase of the drones, the government of India will be giving regular subsidies to the women SSGs. In the next article, we'll be seeing the very basic concepts of the left-wing extremism in India, because recently 8 Nakshals were killed in Chhattisgarh, along with our own security personnel has also passed away in this military operation against the Nakshals. And here this is a very, very important aspect for prelims and GST, where we have to talk about the current events of international importance, and also about the development and spread of extremism in the nation. Now here, we have to talk about the origins and the causes of the LWE extremism in the nation, or the left-wing extremism. Now, left-wing extremism is a kind of an armed rebellion against the state when it is having a particular ideology, particularly in this case Maoist ideology, which is actually trying to raise arms against the established national government. And we can understand that initially the main seeds of the revolution started from, say, West Bengal, right, where Chadu Majumdar actually led the revolutionary thought of raising arms against the state, and it gradually spread across the entire India. It is popularly also known as the Red Corridor, where we have to understand from 1990s to also as early, as present as 2010 and even 2015, we saw the amount of Nakshal violence increasing over a period of time. And the main cause of say the Nakshal violence is one of the main reason that was recommended by the B. Bandyopadhyay committee in 2006, that it is generally due to the various socio-economic causes of the region, because we understand the youth in this region were radicalized, and due to various other aspects we find that the local leaders of LWE, they start to weaponize issues such as poverty, hunger, low level of education, infrastructural development, and they try to radicalize the youth on these regions, right? And finally we find that the local people, they are also sometimes in a dilemma to actually to go on which side, either the government side or on the Nakshal side, because both of them are actually at loggerheads, and the government of India has taken stringent measures to actually reduce the LWE violence in the country. And it has been seen time and again that state governments have been regularly passing the buck of, say, responsibility of curbing the violence to the center. And this is a very, very important point because of the various initiatives and also the various failures of the initiatives that has been seen in the past. When we talk about the various amounts of issues, when we talk about the land alienation and displacement, it is very, very important to talk about land rights, because the main aspect of this LWE is actually the ownership of land, and that is actually the main demands of the LWE activists and the leaders there, right? Now, there have been many infrastructural projects, there have been many development that took place in the region, and here the local people felt that they were not adequately represented in the various services, in the various economic sectors, and that is why the violence even spread even more, right, in the this period of time. And also when we talk about the Adivasi, right, the tribal rights, especially with reference to various amendments as we have seen in the recent Forest Conservation Act. Right? There were many provisions regarding the definition of forest and say the various amount of rehabilitation measures and so on. We find that various acts and laws and regulations were not in conformity with reference to the local areas, and also we find that LWE leaders, they try to radicalize the people based on the various false claims on the non-performance of the government. It is not that the government is not performing in this region. Government over a period of time has taken many initiatives, but we have to understand that the radicalization that actually started back in the time, it is still continuing over a period of time. But we find that as of now, the violence has actually decreased from 2000s to 2023 decade, right? We find that the amount of violence, or say amount of say deaths, amount of violence has actually decreased, and this is where we have to understand that the government initiatives in the same has played a very big major role because of the huge amount of presence of CRPF, NIE, ED, right? The government have taken the stringent measures to curb the violence there. Also, the government has focused on the modernization and investing of money and resources in the technology of the forces, particularly installation of mobile towers. Successful examples of various state government measures, particularly as we talk about Andhra Pradesh, this anti LWE measure is known as greyhounds. Maharashtra took actually very huge amount of initiatives by strengthening the local police and this forming of C60 force. In West Bengal, confidence building measures were taken between the security forces and then local natives in Jangal Mahal. We have in Chhattisgarh, Salwa Judam, and also the district reserve guard, which is actually taking care of the LWE issues. In Jharkhand, we have the Jharkhand Jaguars, which is also combating LWE, and in Odisha, we have various interventions in Koraput region by the local police there. We also have the Roshni scheme, which is trying to promote the skill development of the local people so that they can have more economic opportunities in the region to not actually be radicalized and side with the LWE. Under the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Act 2015, it was also inserted that there will be some children in conflict with law. For example, the children in these regions which are actually having conflicts with law due to the radicalization efforts of the LWE. So they must not be prosecuted in this manner where they will be again feeling alienated within the say various laws and regulations of the system, right? So they must be given care and protection from legal issues. And finally, we also have this aspirational districts program where we have to understand there are many districts in the country which is who are actually selected on the low level of economic development parameters and the also amount of trend of LWE presence in the states, in those districts, in those regions. So Indian government is also trying to focus on these districts by increasing the amount of say investments in the region. Finally, we have this Samadhan initiative, right? Please do not forget to mention this in your mains answers, such as smart policing and leadership, aggressive strategy, motivation and training, actionable intelligence, dashboard or database for intelligence, harnessing technology, action plan for each theatre that is in each districts and regions, and no access to financing. This is the main government motto to reduce the amount of Naxalism and LWE in India. In the next one, we'll be looking into the new criminal laws, the 3 new criminal laws which will be coming into effect from July 1, and that is why the personnel at Delhi police are right now being trained on the various provisions. Now, when we talk about these criminal laws, now the Indian Penal Code is known as Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Code of Criminal Procedure is known as Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, and Indian Evidence Act is known as Bharatiya Sakshya Bill of 2023. Now they are no longer bill, they have been made laws as of now. We find that there have been many kind of reconstructions in the various amount of important provisions that we have to note here. We do not look into the various detailed provisions. Please do read these in your handouts. Here we will be focusing on the main important crux here. Firstly, terrorism acts have been expanded and they have been given proper clarity to also include any amount of damage with reference to the critical infrastructure such as information technology, satellites and the various data centers or say cloud centers of the country, or the various aspects of digital, right, infrastructure, and also military, army and defense infrastructure. The minimum punishment for mob lynching in case of murder by more than 5 people have been given or extended to life term or even death plus fine. Organized crimes have been also included as an offense, such as kidnapping and extortion and so on. We also have sedition no longer as an offense under these 3 provisions. We also have a proper definition of community service when a particular person has to do community service after, say, being released from jail, or say granted on bail, or say any other reason. Next, also adultery has been omitted as an offense according to various Supreme Court judgments in the past. And also a minor under a gang rape will no longer be treated as an or say the threshold will be no longer at 16 years. Now the threshold will be at 18 years old. That means the threshold has been increased. Finally, we will be looking at 4 important prelim snippets. We will be starting with Indus Waters Treaty, because recently the World Bank officials are visiting the Jammu and Kashmir region to actually look into the various aspects of the treaty and the issues there. Now we understand as per this treaty, the treaty divided the eastern rivers and the western rivers. The eastern rivers of Satluj, Beas, Ravi, and the mapping aspect is very important for all of you, is actually given entirely to India, and all of the water rights are given exclusively to India. Chenab, Jhelum, and Das, here India's rights over these rivers are limited. Right here, Pakistan is having more rights, because most of the rivers, as we have seen, the basin is actually in the Pakistan region. And this is why we have to understand this Indus Water Treaty was one of the few shoots of light between India and Pakistan, between or say for this partnership. And here this treaty was signed on September 19, 1960, right? And there was actually a representation of World Bank after 9 years of negotiation, correct? And this is also, we have to understand, under this treaty we have this Indus Water Commission, right? Once every 5 years this conducts a general inspection of all the rivers in part, and over 100 inspection has been done as of now. And here there have been also many regular meetings which have been taken as of now, or say over a period of years, but there have been many Pakistan objections with reference to this treaty. Right, there have been many allegations by Pakistan that the treaty is no longer reflecting of the recent age. Now let them argue what they want to do. In the next one, we will be looking at initial public offering. Now here, whenever a private company is getting listed on the stock exchanges for the very first time, right, and when it actually becomes a public company from a private company, it will be listing its shares on the stock exchange. Why? Because obviously it wants to raise more money to expand its business. It will be allowing its investors, or say the various insiders of CEOs and the various partners to access to funds. It will be also gaining credibility as a company, the company is listing on a stock exchange. It will also increasing the awareness among the various people, and finally it will be attracting top talent in the industry. So for a company, it's very, very beneficial. It gets listed on a stock exchange. And here, whenever a company is listed on a stock exchange, it is actually filing an initial public offering for the very first time. That is actually regulated by the Securities and Exchanges Board of India. And whenever that company is filing to the SEBI, it has to submit a red herring prospectus, which is the very first step of an IPO, right, to actually get listed on a stock exchange. After this, there will be many other stages. Finally, when the IPO will be registered, and this will be open to be sold in the markets. As of now, recently, Hyundai is actually thinking of releasing India's first ever largest IPO. And here, when the company has already had an IPO, or it is listed in a stock exchange, the company can even raise more money by actually issuing follow-on public offer. This is actually after one company has already listed an IPO, and now the company even wants more money from the people for expanding of the business. And it has been also seen over a period of time that many central public sector enterprises, or CPSs, have been using IPOs as a form of disinvestment. That if it is giving out IPO, or say it is actually listing on the stock exchange and giving more and more shares to the people, and this is actually a form of disinvestment where the government is trying to reduce its ownership in some PSB CPSs which are not making profits. Now recently this environmental flows monitoring system was envisaged, where this is actually taking place under National Mission for Clean Ganga under the Jal Shakti Ministry. It is looking into the real-time monitoring of river quality, because we have to understand Ganga is actually considered one of the most polluted rivers in the nation, and that is why we have to improve the quality of the same. And this is where we have to also consider the Namami Gange program activities monitoring, which will be possible under this e-flows portal. And Namami Gange was actually launched in 2014-15 for the rejuvenation of the Ganga and the strait tributaries, which had funding of around 20,000 crores, right? And we have to understand that a major part of the portal of this monitoring system will be looking at the sewage treatment plants. And finally, the data also will be utilized from the Central Water Commission. Finally, we will be looking into gene editing. Gene editing is a very sophisticated technology using mainly three processes such as meganucleases, zinc finger nucleases, TALEN and CRISPR-Cas9. Now, whenever we understand there are any issues with the genetic material, there can be some diseases, there can be genetic issues. So, when we try to remove and cut it out and replace with a healthy gene and hence make the living organism much more healthy, much more productive, that is known as gene editing. It can be applied in many aspects of biotechnology by making life more better, and also we have to understand this is actually helped by this kind of technologies. We will not be going into too much of technical details are not important, but please do remember that these are actually used for modifying gene, right? And also for your reference, CRISPR-Cas9 was also covered in the previous analyst session, so I highly encourage you to please do watch it, right? And there are many types, as we have seen. There are generally 4 types here, and gene therapy is also derived from gene editing, where we have to understand gene or cell with non-functioning gene is selected, and finally a healthy DNA is inserted here, and finally this healthy DNA becomes a part of the cell and makes it healthy again. Now, there have been many treatments especially with reference to cancer and many genetic disorders which have been successfully treated with gene therapy. So this is the main concept that you need to know in this. And with this, I thank you all for being very patient audience here. Please do follow the quiz and attempt in the comment section and let me know what are the answers. Till the best, all the best to all of you till we meet again. Thank you.